Janitor bullied at work meets Ronaldo, and his life changes overnight. Miguel gripped the handle of his mop, his knuckles whitening as he pushed it slowly across the hotel's marble floor. The lobby of the Grand Rivera Hotel gleamed under the golden chandeliers, reflecting the wealth of its guests and the arrogance of its staff. The air smelled of expensive cologne, fresh linen, and power. Power Miguel had never possessed. He had worked at the hotel for nearly 5 years, yet to the staff he was invisible. His only value was how quickly he could wipe away their spills, how quietly he could scrub their messes, how obediently he could fade into the background. But Lucas always saw him. Lucas, the general manager's son, had a way of making sure Miguel never forgot his place. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a crisp navy suit that likely cost more than Miguel's entire salary. His slicked-back hair and confident smirk carried the entitlement of a man who had never worked for anything in his life. Miguel had just finished mopping near the reception desk when he heard that familiar, taunting voice. "Still here, janitor?" Lucas leaned against the polished counter, swirling the ice in his glass of whiskey. "Haven't they fired you yet?" Miguel kept his eyes down, focusing on the water spreading across the marble in slow, glistening waves. He had learned long ago that responding only made things worse. Lucas chuckled, tilting his head. "I asked you a question." Miguel sighed, wringing the mop. "I'm just doing my job." "Your job?" Lucas took a slow step forward, his expensive shoes tapping against the floor. "Your job is to make sure this place is spotless. And yet," he gestured dramatically at the marble, "it looks like a disaster." Miguel clenched his jaw, inhaling deeply. He wasn't stupid. He knew where this was going. "I just finished cleaning," he said evenly. Lucas feigned surprise, raising his brows. "Did you?" "Because from where I'm standing, I see a mess." Before Miguel could react, Lucas's foot shot out, kicking the bucket beside him. Dirty water splashed across the pristine white floor, streaking the marble with grayish filth. Miguel froze. The icy water seeped into his shoes, soaking his socks, but that wasn't what made his pulse hammer against his ribs. It was the laughter. The sound of Lucas's friends chuckling from the reception desk, watching the spectacle unfold like it was their entertainment for the night. Lucas stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough so that only Miguel could hear. "Now you really have a reason to clean." Miguel's hands curled into fists at his sides, but he forced himself to remain still. He had seen what happened to the other workers who talked back. They were fired before they could even grab their belongings. Lucas had connections. His father practically owned the place. Fighting back would mean losing his only source of income. And he couldn't afford that. Not when his mother was sick. Not when every paycheck went toward her medication, her doctor's visits, her treatments. Miguel bent down, reaching for the bucket. Lucas smirked. "Good boy." The words stung more than they should have, but Miguel ignored him, grabbing the mop and beginning the process all over again. One day, he told himself. One day all of this will change. He just didn't know how soon that day would come. The hotel bustled with activity that night, preparing for an exclusive VIP event in the grand ballroom. The wealthiest businessmen, celebrities, and politicians would be in attendance. Miguel had overheard the staff whispering about it all week, but he never paid much attention. Rich people throwing rich parties, it was nothing new. But tonight felt different. There was an odd energy in the air, a certain anticipation rippling through the staff. Even the manager himself was out on the floor, nervously fixing his tie, glancing at the entrance every few minutes. Miguel didn't have time to think about it. He had been assigned to clean the ballroom before the event, a task that should have required at least 3 workers, but Lucas had made sure Miguel was the only one available. He scrubbed the floors, polished the tables, wiped down the crystal chandeliers. His arms ached, sweat gathering at his temples, but he pushed through. It wasn't until he was almost finished that the disaster happened. A deep red stain, wine maybe, was splattered across the pristine carpet. Miguel's heart dropped. He had cleaned this room twice. How had he missed this? Panic surged through him. He grabbed his supplies, dropping to his knees, scrubbing furiously. The stain wasn't coming out. His hands trembled as he scrubbed harder, his breath coming in sharp bursts. Then he heard the footsteps. Slow, deliberate. The sound of expensive leather against polished marble. Lucas. Miguel didn't need to look up to know what had happened. Well, Lucas's voice was full of mock sympathy. "Looks like we have a problem." Miguel's stomach twisted. "I don't know how this got here." Lucas crouched down, resting his forearm on his knee as he grinned. "I do." "You're a terrible janitor." Miguel looked up, locking eyes with him. "I cleaned this room. Someone else must have." "Are you calling me a liar?" Lucas's expression darkened, his tone dropping to something far more dangerous. Miguel's heart pounded. He wasn't stupid. He knew exactly what was happening. Lucas had set him up, and now there was nothing he could do about it. "You know," Lucas said, standing up, brushing imaginary dust from his slacks, "I think my father's going to want to hear about this. A janitor ruining an event for our most important guest? That's unacceptable." Miguel swallowed, his throat dry. "I'll talk to him," Lucas continued, stepping toward the exit. "See if we can get someone a little more competent in your position." Miguel bolted up, dropping his cleaning supplies. "Please. I need this job." Lucas stopped, tilting his head. "You should have thought about that before you started screwing up." Miguel's hands shook at his sides. His pulse roared in his ears. The injustice of it all burned through him, a fire he had kept buried for too long. But what could he do? What could he possibly do? Lucas gave him one last smirk before walking out, leaving Miguel standing in the empty ballroom, staring at the stain that would cost him everything. Miguel's fingers trembled as he pulled his jacket tighter around himself. The hotel lobby was cold, colder than usual. Or maybe that was just the way he felt inside. Lucas had wasted no time. Within the hour, Miguel had been fired. No discussion. No second chances. Just a quick signature on a termination paper and a security escort to the door. He hadn't even gotten the chance to explain. The staff watched as he left, their expressions unreadable. Some looked away. Some whispered to each other. None of them spoke to him. And why would they? He was nothing to them. A janitor. Replaceable. Disposable. He sat on the stone steps outside the hotel, staring at his hands. They were rough, calloused, covered in faint scars from years of hard labor. He had spent his entire life working, yet he had nothing to show for it. His mother would be devastated. How would he afford her medication now? The weight of it all crushed him. His chest tightened, his vision blurring. He ran a hand down his face, inhaling deeply, trying to suppress the overwhelming sense of failure. Then, out of nowhere, the whisper started. Not about him. About someone else. Someone important. Miguel wiped his eyes, frowning as he turned his head toward the hotel entrance. And that was when he saw him. The man who would change his life forever. Miguel's breath hitched as he recognized the figure walking toward the hotel entrance. The crowd's whispers confirmed what his mind refused to believe. Cristiano Ronaldo. The Portuguese legend, the global icon, the man whose posters Miguel had pinned to his walls since he was a child. Miguel blinked rapidly, almost convinced he was imagining it. He had spent years watching Ronaldo on his beat-up television set, admiring his dedication, his skill, his rise from humble beginnings to global fame. And now he was here in the flesh, just a few feet away. The hotel staff scrambled to accommodate him. The receptionist, who usually ignored Miguel, was suddenly all smiles, her voice trembling with excitement. Waiters adjusted their uniforms, standing taller, trying to look important. Even Lucas, the man who had just cost Miguel his job, straightened his tie and stepped forward, his usual smugness morphing into polished professionalism. Lucas extended a hand, his voice dripping with fake warmth. "Mr. Ronaldo, welcome to the Grand Rivera Hotel. It's an honor to have you." Ronaldo barely acknowledged him. He was scanning the entrance, his sharp eyes sweeping across the room until they landed, unexpectedly, on Miguel. Miguel, still sitting on the cold steps outside, frozen in disbelief. A flicker of recognition crossed Ronaldo's face, his brows furrowing. Then, in a move that stunned everyone, he stepped away from Lucas, away from the eager staff, and walked directly toward Miguel. Miguel's heart hammered against his ribs. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Ronaldo stopped right in front of him, his towering presence casting a shadow over Miguel's hunched frame. "Are you Miguel?" The footballer's voice was smooth, but there was something else there too, certainty. Miguel's throat went dry. Yes, he croaked. "I'm Miguel." Behind them, Lucas and the rest of the staff stiffened. The receptionist's mouth hung open. The bellboys exchanged confused glances. No one understood what was happening. Miguel swallowed, still dazed. "How do you know my name?" Ronaldo smiled slightly, tilting his head. "You don't remember, do you?" Miguel blinked, his mind racing. "Remember what?" Ronaldo exhaled, his expression softening. "It was years ago. I was just a kid. Hungry, alone. I had nothing. And you helped me?" Miguel's brows knitted together. That wasn't possible. He had never met Ronaldo before. Not in person. Not in. Then, suddenly, a memory surfaced. A small boy, ragged clothes, standing outside a bakery in Lisbon. His stomach had growled so loudly Miguel had heard it from across the street. Miguel, just a young man himself at the time, had been delivering fresh bread from the bakery where he worked. He had seen the boy staring at the display with hunger in his eyes but shame in his posture, as if asking for food was an unforgivable sin. Miguel had gone inside, bought 2 extra loaves with his own money, and handed them to the boy. "Eat," Miguel had said simply. The boy had stared at him, hesitant at first, but when Miguel gave him an encouraging nod, the child devoured the bread. Miguel had expected him to run off after that, but instead, the boy had looked up and said in a quiet, grateful voice, "Someday I'll repay you." Miguel had chuckled, brushing it off. "You don't have to." And that had been that. He hadn't thought about it since. Miguel inhaled sharply as reality came crashing back. That boy had been Cristiano Ronaldo. His chest tightened. That was you?" Ronaldo smiled, that same familiar smile. It was. Miguel felt his entire body go numb. Before he could process it, Lucas stepped forward, forcing out a laugh. "What a coincidence," he said, his voice forcibly light. "Ronaldo, this man was just let go from our staff." "He was fired?" Ronaldo cut in, his expression darkening. "Why?" Lucas hesitated for only a second before smiling again. "Unreliable. He ruined the ballroom for tonight's event." Miguel knew Lucas was lying, but he wasn't prepared for what happened next. Ronaldo turned fully to Lucas, his jaw tightening. His voice, once calm, was now dangerously cold. "Let me get this straight." He folded his arms across his chest. "You fired Miguel, a man who spent his life working hard, while you—" His eyes flicked over Lucas's polished suit. "Sit here playing boss?" Lucas's face reddened. I was only following hotel policy. Right?" Ronaldo gave a small nod as if considering something. Then he tilted his head slightly and spoke words that sent a shiver through the room. "I'd like to speak to the owner." Silence. Lucas's throat bobbed. "My father is busy?" Ronaldo finished. "No problem. I'll wait." Lucas's fake confidence cracked. His eyes darted toward the other staff members, but no one stepped in to save him. Ronaldo waited. And waited. Then, after a long moment of suffocating silence, Lucas cleared his throat. "I'll get him." With that, he bolted toward the back offices, leaving the rest of the staff staring wide-eyed. Miguel sat there, still processing what had just happened. Then, unexpectedly, Ronaldo turned back to him. "Stand up." Miguel hesitated. Ronaldo extended a hand. "You don't belong down there." Miguel stared at it for a long second. Then finally he took it. Ronaldo pulled him to his feet, clapping a firm hand on his shoulder. "Tonight you're not a janitor." Miguel swallowed thickly, still overwhelmed. "Then, what am I?" Ronaldo smiled. "You're my guest." A ripple of shock spread through the staff. "The janitor? Ronaldo's guest?" Before Miguel could say anything else, Lucas's father arrived. An older man, slicked back hair, expensive Rolex. His expression was irritated, clearly unaware of what was happening. "Mr. Ronaldo," he greeted, shaking Ronaldo's hand too eagerly. "An honor. What can we do for you?" Ronaldo was calm, controlled. "You can start by explaining why your son fired one of the hardest working men in this building." The owner's smile faltered. His gaze flickered to Miguel, then back to Ronaldo. "There must have been a misunderstanding. If there's an issue, No issue." Ronaldo's voice was firm. "Just letting you know that from this moment forward, Miguel works for me." The owner's lips parted slightly. Lucas, who had returned, went pale. Miguel's chest tightened. I don't understand." Ronaldo turned to him, his smile returning. "You said you needed a job, right?" Miguel's throat felt tight. "Yes." "Then consider yourself hired." Ronaldo grinned. "You're coming with me?" Miguel couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. His entire world had just shifted. Lucas stammered, his face red with humiliation. This is ridiculous. You're seriously taking him with you?" Ronaldo tilted his head, expression unreadable. "Would you rather I stayed here and did business with you?" Lucas fell silent. The owner, realizing what was at stake, forced a laugh. "Of course, Miguel is welcome to work wherever you'd like." Ronaldo nodded. "Good." Then he turned back to Miguel. "Get your things?" Miguel couldn't move. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be real. But it was. And for the first time in years, Miguel felt something he had almost forgotten. Hope. He inhaled deeply, then nodded. "Yes, sir." And just like that, his life changed forever. Miguel could barely feel his feet as he walked through the hotel, his mind still struggling to grasp the reality of what had just happened. The whispers followed him, spreading like wildfire among the staff. Just an hour ago he had been nobody, a janitor, a background figure, someone they laughed at behind his back. Now he was leaving as Cristiano Ronaldo's personal guest. Lucas stood frozen, his face pale with shock, his father beside him, lips pressed into a tight, fake smile as they watched Ronaldo put a hand on Miguel's shoulder and lead him toward the entrance. The bellboys who had once ignored Miguel rushed to open the doors. The receptionist, who had barely acknowledged his existence, now looked at him with thinly veiled jealousy. Miguel wasn't used to this kind of attention. He had spent his life trying to blend in, keep his head down, work hard and survive. Now every set of eyes in the lobby was on him. And for the first time he didn't feel small. As they stepped outside, Miguel hesitated. I don't even know what to say, he admitted, his voice still thick with disbelief. Ronaldo grinned. Then don't say anything yet. Just come with me. A black luxury car was already waiting, the driver standing by the door. Miguel hesitated, looking down at his old, worn-out shoes, his second-hand jacket that barely kept out the cold. This wasn't his world. He didn't belong in cars like this, standing beside a man like Ronaldo. As if sensing his hesitation, Ronaldo turned to him, amusement flickering in his eyes. You ever been in a car like this before? Miguel shook his head. Good, Ronaldo said with a grin. First time for everything. The door opened. Miguel swallowed hard and stepped inside. The interior was as luxurious as he had imagined. Smooth leather seats, a scent so clean it barely felt real, an atmosphere so different from the one he had lived in all his life. The door shut, sealing him inside a new reality. The car ride was silent at first. Miguel felt uneasy, his hands resting awkwardly on his lap. It wasn't nerves, it was the overwhelming surrealness of it all. He finally turned to Ronaldo. Why are you doing this? Ronaldo leaned back, his gaze thoughtful. Because I know what it's like. Miguel frowned. What do you mean? You think I was always rich? Ronaldo asked, raising a brow. I came from nothing, Miguel. My family had so little that sometimes we went without food. I used to clean tables in a small shop, dreaming about playing football while people walked past me like I was invisible. He exhaled. I worked my way up, but I never forgot the people who were kind to me when I had nothing. Miguel listened, absorbing every word. You were one of those people, Ronaldo continued. You didn't have much, but you gave me food when I was starving. You didn't ask for anything in return. And maybe to you it was just a small thing. But to me? He smiled slightly. It meant everything. Miguel's chest tightened. He had never expected something so small to come back to him in such an enormous way. You don't owe me anything, Miguel whispered. Ronaldo shrugged. Maybe not. But I can help you now. If you let me. Miguel hesitated. It was too much. A new job, a new life, being around people like Ronaldo. It felt impossible. What if I fail? He asked quietly. Ronaldo laughed, shaking his head. Then you try again. And again. And again. Success isn't about never failing, Miguel. It's about never stopping. Miguel let that sink in. And for the first time in a long, long time he let himself hope. The next few days passed in a blur. Miguel found himself in an entirely new world. One filled with luxury, opportunity, and people who suddenly treated him with respect. Ronaldo had arranged everything. Miguel now had a real job, working as part of his personal staff. No more mopping floors for minimum wage. No more bending his head under the weight of other people's cruelty. It was strange at first. Miguel wasn't used to being valued. He wasn't used to people calling him sir instead of barking orders. He wasn't used to having a future. But the best part? The very first thing he did with his new salary was buy his mother the best medical treatment available. The look on her face when he told her? That moment was worth more than anything money could buy. A few weeks later, Miguel returned to the Grand Rivera Hotel. But this time he wasn't a janitor. He walked through the lobby, his posture straight, his head high. His new clothes fit him well, his shoes no longer scuffed, his confidence stronger than ever. Lucas was behind the reception desk, but he looked different. The arrogance was gone. The confidence had crumbled. He was just another employee now. His father had been furious after what happened with Ronaldo, and though Lucas hadn't been fired, he had been demoted. Now he stood behind the desk, watching Miguel in stunned silence. Miguel stopped in front of him, the moment too perfect, too poetic. Lucas swallowed hard, gripping the counter. You actually left with him? Miguel smiled slightly. I did? Lucas hesitated, his usual smugness replaced with uncertainty. So what are you now? His assistant? His driver? Miguel didn't brag. He didn't gloat. He simply met Lucas's gaze and said, "I'm someone you'll never look down on again." Lucas's expression faltered. He had spent years treating Miguel like nothing. Now, Miguel was untouchable. And that was true victory. Miguel didn't linger. He had nothing to prove. He simply nodded, turned on his heel, and walked toward the exit. As he stepped outside, the sunlight warm on his face, Miguel realized something life-changing. All those years he had spent struggling, enduring humiliation, believing he would never be more than just a janitor, he had been wrong. He had always been more. He had just needed the chance to see it. Ronaldo had given him that chance. And now, Miguel wasn't just surviving. He was living. And the best part? He was just getting started.